So, but this prompts me to ask you and others as well. Is it because the Disney did great marketing and the marketing of Indian stories was not so good in the past, or less that Walt Disney or Tintin that or Archie's that people grew up with those stories?
I think so, which is exactly what Amish said. You know, that it's not that he's not read books before that weren't meant to be bestsellers. It's just that we don't know about it. So it's a lot of marketing, it's a lot of characterization also, adding some passion into the thing, adding some characters that you can relate to as well, which I don't think we've had enough, even on a slightly different topic. But if you see, for example, in India, it's not like we don't have good monuments or historical structures. But we have no tour guides or bus tours or anything like that. I've lived in London for 11 years. In the UK, every city that you go to Cardiff, you go to Canterbury, you go to Oxford. Even if they don't have anything, they'll have a city tour of the place, which is just taking all the little things which are nicely done up, renovated and kept in good condition and showed. So it's the same thing in how in India, it's not like we don't have things to show, and it's not like we don't have stories to tell. It's just that it's like what the advice that Amish got. People think that what will sell is what appeals to youngsters and what appeals to the frivolous sort of issues. But I think now with the new generation that is coming up, the people are more educated. You see the entire e-commerce brass today. Half of the people are people who've come from abroad and said, I've got so much in India, I don't need to go anywhere else. And I think there's a similar thing that might happen to answer your question as well.
So let me hazard a guess, Naveen, before I come to you, and I will differ a bit, Swati, on that. And of course, I could be wrong, but this is just so that we can
that's
discuss.
That's the point of the discussion. Go for it.
See, I think what Amish said earlier, that like when I saw the video of the video which came on Amish earlier, and I saw in the bookstore a lot of youth standing in the queues, waiting for a signature or for the book. Youth, right? And then when you wonder, in this tech world, digital, WhatsApp, people don't have time. So if an 18-year-old, what does he want to know about Shiva or triology? And who wants to go 5,000 years or 10,000 today? Wants to know, okay, bhala kya hota tha? But then when you see those, you say, my God, these are the guys who are reading it. So I think it's not about time and age. I think you could freeze time. A story could be yesterday's, a story could be billion years back. I think what Amish said is something I'm taking a learning, that if it can touch your heart, it doesn't matter.
Exactly.
Wo story kab ki hai.
Yeah.
And I think it is the way the marketing is done. So Naveen, now I want you to comment.
Just to add that it's not only about marketing; it's about the entire product. So, for example, you took Walt Disney versus look at Indian animated movies. If we go into the movies example, just the quality of the entire product, the way it's presented, the way the thinking has gone behind creating that product was at a very, very different level. You look at the action sequence. So I'm hoping everybody has seen Bahubali. That's probably the first movie that you see that, okay, this is now becoming closer to world class in terms of the product itself. And now if that's combined with marketing, it can do wonders. So it's done really, really well for the against the expectation it may have. So if the product is now becoming closer because of probably the access of technology, probably the internet, probably the right set of people and the right kind of background of people coming into that area. So whether it's writing, whether it's Bollywood, whether it's the animated part of it, which was probably lacking in people who were working on the Indian stories earlier.
Wonderful. Anyone, Kakun, Adi, Raghav, anybody wants to have a take?
Actually, I had a question for you. So,
and with this question of this whole discussion, Amish, I wanted to put your take.
So, I guess there are stories, and I for one found your books really engaging because they were, in a sense, they brought God and made him man, and you humanized him. But I think it was also, in a way, controversial. I mean, you broke a lot of rules. You might have offended a lot of traditional people who had kind of. My grandmother reading your books, I think, would have turned in a grave a few times. So how did you manage to kind of deal with this resistance and continue writing 2 more books? And I think I'm hoping to read your new book now, and I assume it's in the same vein as well. It's modernizing what we've all been told for many years. So how do you deal with the controversy of it?
Look, firstly, I mean, one of the things that I've learned is in India, there are very, very small minority of extremists in every faith, but a vast majority of Indians are actually deeply liberal, deeply religious and deeply liberal. And by liberal, I don't mean being leftist. By liberal, I mean they're willing to listen to a different point of view. That's why you have so many versions of the Ramayana, so many versions of the Mahabharata. And I found that almost in 95% of the cases, controversies are actually created by the authors or artists themselves for the sake of publicity. So if you yourself avoid controversy, it doesn't happen. And that's I mean, it might sound theoretical, but I'm a living proof of it. So I agree, many of my readers are actually the youth, but I have many older readers as well, who when they meet me, they have a different conversation. Okay, you've taken this story from this Purana and interpreted it this way, because many of them know the traditional stories. And they say, yeah, I mean, it's a very nice interpretation you've taken. So that, I believe that thing exists, which makes me add a little bit to the discussion that we were having earlier. One of the benefits that most of us marketers have in our country, or that we are living in a country where cultural nuances, cultural thoughts have actually existed for thousands of years, which means we have symbols where we can convey complex thoughts very quickly. Like for example, in a Hindi movie, if you want to show a person is dying, you just have a diya on the side, the flame goes off, and that's it. Every Indian will understand the guy's died. Unlike in the Western world where you have to build up many things, right? And this is just like simple symbols which are just so deeply ingrained in us because of thousands of years. They're like a part of our DNA. Now these are symbols that we can use, and often marketers don't use. There's a lot of symbology that is a part of our DNA, because we are a rare ancient culture that has survived till today. Most other ancient cultures have died out. They don't exist today. I mean, the modern Italians don't really believe in the Roman gods, the Roman things anymore. The modern Egyptians, the modern Greeks don't really. They're not continuous. Whereas we have a living mythology, a living story. And this is a resource for us that can be used. It's a way storytelling is also communicated often. You have to understand how Indians look at stories. And if you can tap into that, you can really tap into something that's a part of the DNA. Like for example, how Indians approach endings of stories. Many of us who are westernized, we see Western movies which actually have been influenced, to a fair degree by Aristotle's Poetics, where there's this concept that the ending of a story must have a sense of conclusion. It must be a kind of ending where the wrapping paper has been put, a bow has been put, everything is complete and proper, either sad or happy, and you put it into a cupboard and you forget about it. We've absorbed many of those influences from the West as well. But if you actually look at ancient Indian stories, this wasn't the approach to endings in India. The ancient approach to endings was you should not have a sense of conclusion at the end. You should be troubled by the end. You should be so troubled that it keeps kind of goading you inside. And that keeps the story alive because you simply cannot forget it. You keep asking questions. Why did this ending happen this way? When you think of it this way, then the ending of the Ramayana makes sense to you. Like all through the story, Lord Ram is so deeply in love with Sita Ma, and then he abandons her at the end. It's almost out of character, and it just keeps troubling you. Why did he do this? The Mahabharata, if you see the ending, if the Mahabharata had ended where the Pandavas win and they rule happily ever after, it would have been the Western storytelling style. But does the Mahabharata actually end there? No, it doesn't. Carries on after that. All the Pandavas climb the mountains to go to the heavens. One by one, all the Pandavas keep falling down. Only Yudhishthir and a dog, and that dog is symbolic actually, by the way, they reach heaven. Who do they find out there? The Kauravas. I remember the first time I heard this story, I was 10 years old at that time, the complete story, I was like, what? This makes no sense. What are the Kauravas doing there? They're supposed to be evil. And then the Mahabharata actually ends there. Now this is the Indian storytelling style, because the ending troubles you so much that you simply cannot forget it. You keep asking questions. You learn philosophies through those questions. If you can have this kind of storytelling style in books and movies where the ending actually leaves you troubled, you'll have something that connects deeply to our DNA. Because we are actually philosophy lovers. We approach stories as a means to learn philosophy. Even taxi drivers in India are philosophers. So we are philosophy lovers essentially. You go to you travel by taxi in Italy or something, he's not going to talk philosophy to you. But if you travel by an Indian taxi, he'll talk philosophy to you, the taxi driver. We are all philosophy lovers. If you can get that in somehow through a series of questions, then you've connected to the Indian DNA. That's what marketers have to realize. We are lucky to be living in a culture where there are a lot of symbology, a lot of things which are a part of our DNA. If you can tap into that, then you're tapping into a very powerful, deep source of emotions. And then your brand deeply connects.
On a lighter note, this is the scariest part for marketeers because you make a story of 30 seconds, an ad which in the end has a result saying, this detergent works. But if Amish says it should lead to more questions than a solution, now what do you do? So, Amish, this one is again to you. And again on the topic we were talking. We have older civilization, so we should have more stories. But the Western countries comes out with more stories while their civilization is not so old. So are we not good at storytelling? Are we not good at marketing? Are our stories not powerful? And that's the product. Or what is it? What are we missing? I mean, we should have the largest number of stories.
Look, as a country, we've had a bad 200 years, and it can happen to anyone, you know. And if you look at our entire culture, we were master storytellers. We are recovering from, you know, a period of the colonial experience was really shattering for us, for our confidence. We are recovering now. Yeah? You'll see the storytelling culture reviving again. I think our old culture is reviving. I certainly believe that. And that's why I believe once again that you have to get more and more into the nuances of the Indian way. If you can tap into that, then you can really connect your brand and emotions deeply.
No, very well said. Because I mean, people like you who can write, I think that inspires a lot of people who've done MBA, because MBAs normally don't write, right? They've taken a line. Which also brings me to one more point. I think we all live stories. We all are stories. I think all of us are a story. Our life is a story, and all of us see ourselves as the hero or the heroine or the lead character of the story called life, and that's our own life is a story. And I mean, how engaging can it be that it strikes me so hard that even though my daughter is 11, every night she wants to sleep, she'll say, "Mujhe story sunao." And she'll lose herself in the fantasy of a story and then go to sleep. And which also reminds that as long as you're younger children, you need to hear a story to go to even sleep. And I think and all of us were there once. And I think at the end of life also, you look back at life as a story. I think it's somewhere in the middle that we lose the story, or we get so engrossed and it becomes very tactical that the chapter doesn't connect with the book. I don't know, as a marketeers, do we use all this? I mean, what Amish speaks is forcing us to think. And Naveen, any take you have on this?
I think like has been discussed, and Amish was saying, the art of storytelling is of course not easy one. And I was very intrigued by what Amish said about making the end non-conclusive in one sense. It's very interesting point. But when you look at what's happening, look at the stories, most of the stories have a very very conclusive end actually, and it makes you think on. It must be very very difficult to create a end which is not conclusive. So I remember that from my experience that 80s parallel cinema was trying to do some of that, where they used to leave the end very inconclusive, but probably that didn't work. So it must be very very difficult. So in fact I had a question on how do you crack that model on creating a end, which I think, by the way, if you again watch TV, the K serials try to do that at the end of every episode. So they kind of leave you in a space where it's non-conclusive, wants you to come back for more. So as a marketer, if you can, in your communication, create that level of engagement, and you're in that category, that's a great thing to do. But it's not a very easy thing to crack, because of the fact that simply it's just so infrequently displayed by everybody, including across industries.
Yeah, Kakon, go on.
In fact, this whole thing about continuous storytelling for brands, to me, what is very apparent, and it's already happening, is that themes are continuous. There's a theme, and around the theme there are different kinds of stories. So, for example, if you've seen the Thai stories, a lot of us have seen them, and one of the things that strikes you is that all these stories are about the goodness of this human being, the fact that somebody is so good, so pure. I think brands more and more are attaching themselves to these kind of themes, where the stories can continue to be told, but the theme remains constant. That's what I'm reading of the situation.
And maybe there's a huge pride in the Indianness of things, right? I think the book itself, it kind of brings back what Swati said. It's right in what our culture is. I guess all of us have seen the paperboard commercials. I think it's a very, very Indian story of a beverage. Here you have an Indian beverage brand fighting two of the biggest international beverage brands in the world, and doing it by not playing in their playground but playing in our own very playground. I think all of us enjoy those beverages and those ads. So I think as marketers, we have to think about how we can leverage our own culture and our own stories to connect back with our consumers.
And
Can
it's
I add
wonderful
one
what
more
you said,
thing?
and Amish, I'll come to it because me and Addy have worked in Coca-Cola, and we also know the paperboard is a very good friend of ours. So what is it, Addy? Do you see it as Indian storytelling versus Western, like a paperboard versus a Coke and a Pepsi, or like, or what do you see? How do you see it?
You know,
Where does storytelling come in?
I'll just take one step back. I have a very close friend of mine, is marketing head of Nike, and he told me 2 years back the fastest selling T-shirt in the Nike store all India was the Arsenal T-shirt. Today the fastest selling T-shirt is the India T-shirt. So I think if we are talking to an Indian audience, I think few years ago there was a thing where everyone wanted to go abroad. Everybody looked up that one cousin in your family who had a job in New York. But today I think there's a huge sense of pride in being Indian, and there's a huge sense of opportunity here. There's a sense of value in going back to what your roots were. And I think to me, Paperboat is not about Western stories or Indian stories. It's about connecting with your own story, and that's what makes it so powerful.
Oh, very true. Because if you're going to compete with them under